Welcome, new Cosmonarchs. I am Pr0totype, and I am here to talk about a wide variety of things in this episode of my solo design podcast. Of course, we are currently working on Cosmonarchy, but this show will follow me wherever I may go in my journey as a game designer and as a community leader, as we have indeed been growing lately, as the No Frauds Club has been doing these regular discussions I've been running over on the other channel. We've been talking about Brood War, we've been talking about RTSs and difficulty and all sorts of other things. It's really cool. It's really cool to see that angle. But we've also been growing in a couple of other places, like our Discord server. We regularly are having more and more people show up by the day. And some of those people are going to convert into regular players. Some of those people are going to convert into supporters on our coffee page. And some of those people will invariably just be cool homies in the Discord server where we can talk shit about all sorts of things, be it general game design, RTS stuff, actually playing the games that we're making, all sorts of things like that. So as all this has been going on, we've released the new fraud launcher, which is very hype, very epic. We've made some really good progress on the Protoss tutorial. It is nearly complete. And we've also been updating a couple of other things, or getting updates about a couple of other things, like the iscript extender, as well as, of course, running the first Gauntlet and maintaining daily YouTube uploads of Cosmonarchy casts, where I'm actually commentating played matches. We're also getting way more matches played per day. So we really need that replay analyzer at this point, because it's going to be real hard to sort of resolve who wins what match and log those results in the next casual ladder whenever we end up getting that back into swing. So yeah, let's just say we're at that point where there's too many matches being played for us to be able to do it manually, I think, in a reliable sense. So with all that said, it is worth pointing out that we are still a growing community. We've got a couple of things that we still need to wrangle as far as the game goes. There's certainly some things that we're going to be updating as well in terms of balance, and we have a lot of other big plans about things like campaigns and a new race being added to the game. So we're going to cover a lot of ground in this episode of Pr0totype. If you're new to the show, if you're new to my channel, if you're new to the project, you should just know that the Cosmonarchy experience is really just a bit of a prototype, kind of like the name of this show, but without the zero in it. The idea behind it is to explore different things within the RTS, use Brood War as a starting point, because, you know, we generally do tend to believe that it is the best RTS game that is out there that we can play, that is like a released product in terms of competitive play and skill ceiling, skill expression, all these other important details. But it might not necessarily be the most fun or the thing that really gives you the most value. The way that you are expressing your skill can be quite satisfying if you alter your mind space to accept details like mischance on ramps and bad unit pathing, or I guess I would say path planning almost. It's not exactly like the technicals are a little bit more specific there, but you know, everything that people say about Brood War that is negative, like the things about the units needing to be babysat and all this other stuff, we kind of agree. We kind of agree with certain details being chores, like, you know, the idea of constantly having to rally your worker. And even though we haven't changed that in Cosmonarchy yet, that's something that we do tend to agree with from a philosophical standpoint. So there's a lot of things that are different about Cosmonarchy compared to Brood War. If you just think that it's kind of like Brood War, I mean, it's not really. It's just made in the Brood War engine. So it's a prototype for our own games. It is much more like our own games will be than like it is Brood War. So to point that out, but we still used Brood War as our starting point. We think exploring from the most successful in the terms of like competitive integrity and stuff, RTS game that's been out there, and the one that has had the most RTS, I would say, like adoption from a competitive standpoint hitherto, spoken of in history so far. That seems like a good idea, right? Learn from the best in the field, even if you personally believe that the best in the field isn't all that great. And yeah, we think that while StarCraft is the best RTS out there, it's not really that great. And it's a nuanced take. It's hard for a lot of people to comprehend that initially, but that's what gives us the gusto, the balls to think that we can do better than the best in the field, the best in the genre. And I'm not sure that Cosmonarchy is actually better than Brood War overall. I would say it's looking likely. We just don't have the player base to really suss that out yet. But as we continue to grow, I think it'll be more and more obvious that we're making something special, something different, something that I think could be the future of the RTS, and that is indeed what we think of Cosmonarchy as. So there's our elevator pitch to new people coming in. We are indeed getting bigger. We do have more and more people showing up, and I think it's important to note that. So going forward, one of the things that I'm going to be doing on this show is creating a new section, just the community roundup. I'm going to be talking about content that has been made by other people in the community or around the community, talk about maybe when big streamers or personalities pick up the game and give it a try and see what's going on. And I'll also comment a little bit about things like, what's been going on in the community. That's like even just the average person, the average player, the rank and file, so to speak, who are checking it out for the first time. Maybe give some shout outs to people who I see playing games and who have not necessarily played before. So yeah, we'll use this as an opportunity to just talk a little bit about the community. And I think normally I'll probably save this for a little bit later on in the show, but since it's the first time the community roundup as a feature is going to be in this podcast, I'll talk about it here. I wanted to give a shout out to Saiyan KCM. I'll leave a link to his Twitch VOD, or his YouTube VOD rather, in the description of this video, but you can check out his gameplay. He played a lot of FFAs, he played a little bit of tutorial stuff. He checked out Cosmonarchy for the first time, and he played all 3 races and checked it out. Definitely had an interesting time. I remember flashback like 6 months ago, if you wanted to do that, there was a high likelihood you would end up having some sort of instability where the crashes would happen, or maybe the AI would be really, really underwhelming. And in some of the games, he did walk over them, but in other of the games, they were much more lethal. And I just thought, man, it's going to be so wonderful when we can say that about the multiplayer too, because it is true. There's a bit of an elephant in every room whenever I talk about Cosmonarchy as this really great thing, is that there is still the desync problem, and we are working very hard to fix that. But the other thing that is really cool, just as a bit of a touchstone moment, is that like now we can pretty reliably say you're probably not going to crash running against with all the things that we've added, and that is a feature on and of itself. Now, normally I would never advise people say, "Wow, congrats, you made the game not crash," a round of applause. But when you're dealing with no source access, you have to reverse engineer, memory hack, all this stuff. You've got a weird tech stack where you got many different plugins, some of them written in Rust, some of them written in C++, some of them written, I think, in something else. So it's just very weird. It's very different, and it's very arduous, right? It's not a very clean way to make changes to the game. And yet that's just because of, a number of different factors, but the chief among them being the fact that we don't have the source code, which results in a very lengthy procedure when you want to add new features and new content and stuff. And yet we've taken it so far. We've done so much with it, and a lot of that has been a community effort. Obviously, I owe a lot of thanks, and a lot of the responsibility for that work goes to people like Veek7, people like Darkened Fantasies, who have chipped in with their programming assistance down the years. And even before that, you think about Nave, you think about people like, I guess it was Poycourt, who's responsible for the initial toolkit. As maligned as his code is, the fact that it exists at all as a starting point is definitely something that without which maybe we wouldn't have gotten as far as we did. Then when you think about BSD Rhino, even way back, thinking about the iscript mapping out iscript and thinking about how all that stuff is good. So we stand on the shoulders of, I don't know if you can call them giants, but at least some of the people who are active in the community right now, they're definitely gigantic. They're huge Q7 and huge fantasies. That's what I'm thinking about. I just don't say that in public. And so when we're thinking about the efforts of everybody, the fact that somebody like Saiyan can walk in, use the new fraud launcher, get set up. He had a little bit of a snafu with the CNC draw file, not giving him his config, not initially allowing him to stream the game properly, capture with OBS. But I helped him through that, and then he was able to go for 4 hours uninterrupted, just playing Cosmonarchy, playing FFAs, playing against AI. Yeah, okay, maybe if he did 4 hours against an actual human player, maybe the desync thing would have reared its head and it would have been ugly. But we'll eventually have that behind us too. And it's heartening to see the work being done, paying off in that respect, where we get to see, people who will stream and get a bunch of viewers and get a bunch of fresh eyes on the project. And I saw a lot of people who weren't in the community, who I didn't recognize the usernames of, who were telling him like, oh yeah, you do this in the thing. And that kind of speaks to me in a way where it's like, oh, maybe they're not, maybe they're by different names in the server or whatever. But maybe they're not part of this community, but they still know a decent amount because maybe they watch the videos and stuff. And so then they see like one of their streamers, one of their guys playing the game. And they're like, oh shit, I know about this. I can help them out. And then they start telling them about madrigals and all this other stuff. It's like, whoa, I don't know how people know about this stuff, right? And even if they didn't know the names of things, they might have said like, oh, that hover tank, or hey, watch out for that giant Protoss ship that's going to glass you. Because like people know about this stuff. People have been around the block and they've seen some of the casts, they've seen some of the clips and stuff, and it's just great. It's great to see that. Obviously, we did a while back have the Artosis clip that I thought was really funny, where I showed him glassing Terran base, and he was like, "Oh my god, this doesn't look like anything I'd want to play." Which is, that to me is peak reaction. I mean, that's what you want Artosis to say in the context of seeing glassing happening. But eventually we'll send him a clip with diadems and lifted anchors and the beautiful new siege tank graphic that DF made, and we'll definitely have a different reaction to something like that, I think. And maybe he'll also say that too. I don't know. Maybe he'll be like, "What? You can lift the bunker? That's stupid. I don't want to play this either." But who knows? Who knows what he'll say? But it was just funny to see that. And then also we had Obviously, Diggity run a couple of casts on his YouTube channel. I'll leave a link to those below as well. Pretty good stuff, man. It's pretty cool. I'll put the Artosis clip in there too. Why not? You know, it's funny stuff. You can check out all these those three that I just listed off: the Saiyan stream, the Artosis clip, and the Diggity cast in the description. Definitely check those out. Show these people some love. Let them know. Well, I guess you can't really show the clip love on for Artosis, but you can check out the other two guys and be like, hey man, really appreciate you checking out Cosmonarchy. It's really cool. I'd love to see you play more or whatever. You can throw some love their way and say like, hey, appreciate you putting your spotlight on this game because it's really cool and I like it a lot. So that alone is enough. And honestly, if we want more and more people to be checking it out, we definitely got to say, hey, the people who are checking it out, you know, maybe we do give you disproportionate views on your streams or on your video content. Maybe we do, you know, send that power and energy over to you to let you know. It leaves comments saying as much like, you know, that's something that we can do to gravitate more and more people over here because we'll get more and more people checking it out. So yeah, just wanted to say that. And as far as the more homegrown talent goes, you know, we're not talking about videos or streams or anything like that. If you want to pop into our Discord server, so far in the last couple of days, we've had people like Nablime and Hamster jumping into the Bullying Corner voice chat and streaming their POVs of matches. And we've had like 5, 6, 7, 8 people in that Bullying Corner voice chat, which is, you know, it's a funny name. All of our channels are named funny things for the most part. Like if you want to check out the programming chat, it's called Dad Oriented Design. I mean, come on now. So, you know, there's all those funny things here and there that you can check out. But the main thing to point out here is just the fact that, yes, we've actually got that, you know, consistency going where, you know, in my morning, Nablime and Hamster will be up there in the voice chat. They'll be streaming their POVs. People will be popping in to see. And that's the kind of shit I like. I like to see that. I know a lot of people will also check out the daily casts. Again, those come out 9 a.m. Eastern time every morning. So you can definitely check those out, you know, adjust your clocks if you're in a different part of the world and imagine when the videos will come out. And by now you've probably already noticed that, but yeah, it's pretty cool. And I'm loving that. I'm loving to see that. I definitely want to get more and more people interested in the project by casting more and more cool games. And hopefully the casting itself is, I think it's getting to a point where it's the energy part is definitely there in pretty much all the videos. Sometimes I'm recording late at night, so I have to be a little bit more subdued. But even then, I feel like I'm usually kind of on the ball. There's been a couple of videos where it's like, well, you don't always get it. Maybe this is a C game video or something, but even the C game I think is watchable. So at least there's that. And thinking about like A, B, C, you know, in terms of your rank or grade or whatever. Maybe I'm not always at my A class or S class type casting game, but I think I'm leveling it up on that front. And of course, if you guys have feedback, just let me know. Let me know. Leave a comment. Tell me what's going on. Tell me what's going through your head. But I think there's a lot of really cool things that can be posted around. And I've kind of been laying off the Brood War subreddit for a little bit, but I did recently post the game where Hamster and Nablime went on and Nablime infested the glassing Star Sovereign and all sorts of crazy shit happened. I thought that was really cool. So I was able to post that and you know, you get a little bit more viewership on that. You get a little bit more people who maybe check it very so often, very infrequently, who will still see that content there because the subreddit doesn't actually have a lot of posts made on it. So it takes a while for your post to go away. So it'll be on the front page of that place for a while. The StarCraft subreddit itself is more geared towards StarCraft 2 and like campaign content and stuff. We'd probably post about our tutorials there and maybe other content. But when I post games like 1v1s or whatever, it doesn't have the same pull as the Brood War one. So it's a little bit harder to get any traction over there. I'm sure there's other places I can post it. I keep posting it on Team Liquid as well. If you guys have suggestions for that sort of thing, let me know. And I'm trying to think if there's anything else that I need to cover here as far as changes to the community are concerned, or like videos and stuff that were made, or things that were made, like the fraud launcher being updated, obviously is a big one. Definitely check the description for a link to that if you don't have it already. It's very easy to install the game now. And if you run into any issues, definitely report them to us so that we can tell you like, okay, if it's a user error for this thing, just to fix that up for you and you're good to go. Or, oh, actually, this is something we should look into and fix ourselves so that other people don't run into it. Even if it's like a low percentage chance, we should at least document it, right? So just definitely be in touch with about those sorts of things. We do have a channel for issue reports in the server. Mostly right now it's just used for reporting desyncs, but you can, you know, maybe report something else that you spot in the game that's wrong or whatever that you think is wrong. Feel free to drop it in there and people will let you know if it's right or not. So without further ado, again, shout out to the community guys. Shout out to Nablime and Hamster for streaming their POVs. Definitely wouldn't mind seeing more people do that. I know Hapsea sometimes does it as well, but more towards my evening than my morning. So yeah, usually you can spot somebody looking for games at the very least, and that shows me we're on the right track. Like, we're getting things pretty consistent. So fingers crossed we can make all that stuff happen. And some of it is probably inflated a little bit because the tournaments are running and ongoing, but I do think that we're probably going to have a pretty consistent amount of people looking for games and practicing up and stuff. And we've had a number of people try out for these sorts of getting into shape for these sorts of tournaments. We've still had Art of Turtle playing, we've had Urbmon playing, we've had Urbmon's brother Grunch playing, we've had another guy Dookie playing. I can't believe these people have names like this. Obviously, you saw a cast over between Jackie and Taco Cake. Both of those guys are kind of new as well. So that's pretty cool. And so anyway, it's cool to see all of that action, all of that stuff going down. I'm a big fan of seeing the people play or hearing about people playing with their family as well. I know obviously the Urbon and his brother were 1v1ing a lot, but then we had what did we have? We had the Beaver playing like 4v4s versus AI with his cousins and his dad or something like that. Like it's cool to see. I don't know if Shambler's been playing with his Boomerman, but I know his Boomerman also plays every now and then. So they had a conversation like, hey, why are you switching to Terran? You're not a Zerg anymore. What's going on? Like, are you okay? Or something like that. I heard about that. It's bringing people together. It's bringing the family together. I think Biddy B's kids even play the test map and stuff. Who knows what's going to happen in the future, man? We're going to have some homegrown Cosmonarchs that are going to grow up with the game. Isn't that incredible, impeccable? Wouldn't have ever dreamed of something like that happening. So anyway, shout out to the community. That was the community roundup for this episode. Let's get to the progress updates. The screenshot that you're looking at here for this episode's background is indeed from The Initiate, which is, of course, the name of the Protoss tutorial. So this is, again, Protoss versus Protoss, brother against brother. You can imagine it is not the most merry of times in the lore, but I do think it's something worth celebrating in the context of an achievement for the game. We'll then have a Protoss tutorial. The Protoss tutorial, to give you guys some context here, has 48 dialogue events. Compared to that to the first draft of the Terran tutorial, which is already available, only has 18 dialogue events. So you're talking about an increase of quite literally 30 dialogue events. And even then, I think we're probably leaving out a couple of options. I think stuff like maybe if your workers are idle, or you're not scouting early on, or you're obviously you don't really tech in the same way as Protoss, but maybe there could be some more dialogue events for like, oh, I see you're still only have gateways and lattices. You should probably branch out to some tier 2 stuff. If it's like 8 minutes, 10 minutes in or something like that. Maybe there's a line for when you don't have an expansion, but maybe you should have an expansion by a second expansion, right? Like getting a third base. Maybe there should be a dialogue about that, just to remind you to scale your economy. There's an anti-float dialogue event for when you have a lot of money floated, but there could probably be more than just that. Like maybe there could be specifically like, oh, you've got a lot of gas, think about getting a tier 3 structure, stuff like that, right? So there's probably even more dialogue events we could add. And the idea that I have as a bit of like a meta contextual goal for the tutorials from my perspective as a developer is what we've done between the Terran and the Protoss tutorial. As we've released the Terran tutorial, we've gotten feedback, iterated on that, and then deployed better things for the Protoss tutorial. And I already kind of have been thinking about ways to improve from the Protoss tutorial standpoint. What will I do in the Zerg tutorial? And then, obviously, in an ideal sense, after we gather more feedback from the Protoss tutorial, I'll have a more complete picture of what to improve going into the Zerg one. But the ideal scenario will be that the Zerg one will just hit it out of the park and will be good enough. And then I go back and retool the Terran and Protoss tutorials to be up to that same standard, and then we're done with the tutorials, right? So I'm not sure when I'll be going back to the Terran tutorial to improve it, because I think just having a tutorial is still pretty good. It's better than nothing, obviously. It's serviceable. Maybe I'll go into the first campaign development or something off the back of the Zerg one being finished, and then we can think about retooling the Terran and Protoss ones a bit later on, or maybe in the middle of that production and stuff like that. And by the way, I'm pretty sure we're going to adopt a serial release schedule for the campaigns, if you can call it a schedule at all. Basically, when a mission is done, it will be released, that sort of thing. And we'll just go from there. Maybe I'll wait a little bit so that like the first couple of missions are available at the start, and then I add new missions every so often. So maybe we start with like 2 or 3 missions or whatever. But regardless of how we initially release stuff, as time goes on, we'll add more and more missions as they are ready to go. And so a lot of that will be that iterative process yet again. But I think it'll be fine. I think that'll be good for the release schedule of the project, since we're also working on things like a new race and, flexing up the the iscript extensions and a bunch of other technical details and like patching up the instabilities and then improving the unit roster, doing balancing, running tournaments. It doesn't necessarily make sense to like block out a whole bunch of time to work on content that will never get released, or eventually it'll get released, but not until after, it's done or whatever. So that's just one example. We're going to follow kind of similar to the tutorial release schedule of when it's done, it's ready, that sort of thing, and just drop it like one mission at a time. That's probably what we're going to do with the campaigns as well, just to point that out. But the Protoss tutorial is pretty much close to done. As of right now, I need to improve the AI for the enemy so that he follows a better plan that will be a little bit more in keeping with the kinds of lessons I want to impart, since right now he's a little bit ad hoc with it, because he's just using like the default stuff configuration with some layouts for improved like SimCity basically. But other than that, it's pretty bare bones. So we'll be retooling his layout so that his build order will be customized just like the Terran one is. That sort of thing will be the case. And then if we go into like there's some dialogue that needs to be tested. I need to test the dialogue events and check out the events to see if like the custom triggers are working properly and all that other stuff. I did do a test earlier to get the screenshot, obviously. And so that's pretty cool. Happy about that. There's definitely more content that needs to be wrangled in general. So I do want to improve things like eventually the Protoss are going to have a unitary union structure that's going to give them access to more units. And I have the dialogue events initially implemented for those, but obviously the structure itself is not implemented. But that's not really something that the tutorial needs. That'll be like a tech tree thing, right? And so, yeah, I think before it releases, it just needs to be vetted and tested as far as the triggers go, and the AI needs to be, improved, vetted, and then tested, and then it'll enter into that phase where I can drop it on pre-release and we can get some feedback from it. Unfortunately, I was not able to make Jesse, who did a lot of really nice feedback for the Protoss tutorial. I was not able to get it done before he had to go on his 2-week-long trip to Japan. So he'll be back, and maybe by that point the Zerg tutorial will be out, and he'll not have been able to provide much feedback in that context, which is a little unfortunate because I was looking forward to that. But hey, maybe he can at least help out with the Zerg one. I'm pretty sure. We'll see how that one goes. And even if he gets the feedback to us a little bit later on, then I think that's still valuable. But I know he was excited to do it, so it's a little unfortunate I wasn't able to get it out earlier. But it just wasn't done. I had to do all the voice acting and editing and stuff, and then wrangle things. And so that's another thing that this tutorial actually needs is some polish up on the audio visuals. But I was willing to release it before without some of the sound effects and some of the changes to the voice processing in a couple of key locations for the lore standpoint. I was willing to release it without those in the context of like, oh, hey, well, here's the testing version, right? And we'll fix those up later. It kind of reminds me of like I heard about the apparently some of the narration in The Witness originally when the game tester builds went out, it was just like Jonathan Blow in a broom closet voice acting all of them himself or reading them all out himself, and like the audio quality wasn't very good. I thought that was kind of funny in the context of like, oh yeah, sure, you just need this out there. It's not production ready, but it's it's good enough for testing and for the the whatever. Like it's probably not going to make a huge difference to the experience of the game most of the time, right? So that's kind of neat. And other than that, it's just cool to see the tutorial come to fruition. When I got attacked in this tutorial, I got this screenshot. I thought that was really cool. We had some nice, we get to see the Vassal, the Ecclesias, the Dracodon, the Legionnaire. We get to see those kinds of units there. And it's some nice like tier 1, Protoss fighting each other, right? And so I think that sums up the experience pretty well for the early stages of the game. Obviously, we're going to see about are we going to get any replays or any people's videos where they go to the late game tech and stuff like that? Is that going to be happening? That's really cool. So yeah, I just want to see what we can see in that context. It's definitely going to be a nice experience to get this tutorial out there for people. And then, I guess the other thing to point out here in this on the subject is I did briefly mention the Zerg tutorial. The thing about the Zerg tutorial is that it was I've basically done the opposite of the Zerg tutorial for the Protoss tutorial. The Protoss tutorial, I left the AI until after the dialogue was done. In the Zerg tutorial, the AI is pretty good. It does the Zerg rush. It does the like 6 pool basically. And then it goes into like trying to expand to a lot of bases and just overwhelm you with numbers. So it's sort of like a mix between a 6 pool build and a Gates of Hell build to give you some idea of what's going on there. So I think technically it's a 7 pool, but it hits really fast anyway. And so I did a bunch of work to like make it so that the early attack would happen earlier than it was before and all this other stuff. So it is something where it will kill players who play it the first time, and they'll just be like, "Holy shit, what the hell's going on?" So that's exactly what I want, right? And so the stomp needs to happen. Now, when it comes to the Zerg tutorial, like the layout's done, the AI is not necessarily done, but it's like in a serviceable state. I just need to write the script and then do the voice acting and then put it in the game as triggers. Now, I say just, but that's like probably a week's worth of work, if not more, because I got to write all the lines. We got to conceive of all of the dialogue events if we're going to add anything based off of the Protoss template, and then we got to actually do the voice acting itself. We got to do the editing itself, and then we got to do the splitting of all of those files and then plugging them into the game. And then we can do the trigger setup itself, like where we plug in all the game logic to say, like, fire this dialogue event at this time when this happens, and all of the balancing act that's required for that sort of stuff. So I think it's worth pointing out that there's still a decent amount of work ahead for the Zerg tutorial, but the fact that it could be done in conceivably like a week or 2 weeks or whatever, it could be done before we get too deep into April. April 13th is when we're going to be running the group stage or the battlement stage, as it's now called, for Acropolis #1. So that's after all the qualifiers are done and stuff. So conceivably, the Zerg tutorial could be free and available before then or around then as a gauge, as an idea for that sort of thing. So that's pretty cool, and I like that idea. So that's just to give you guys a quick status update on that. And I also wanted to give a quick status update on the iscript extender, because there has been a little bit of movement on that. X405 came in. He's the user who helped us out quite a bit with the initial mapping out of what the iscript extender would need. We also have, obviously, Veek around as a bit of a powerhouse in programming. He's recently done the fraud launcher, and now he's going to free up a little bit of his time to look into stuff like the iscript extension method. And we have a bit of a different angle of attack now, where we're probably going to end up, as far as I understand it, we're going to be creating like separate files of iscript code per individual like sprite entry or image entry, which basically means for the layman that like each individual unit has its own entry associated with it for telling the game, how to draw the unit, basically, how to render it. Does it need to render with certain effects? Is it going to render it like a normal unit graphic? Does it turn? That sort of stuff. Like buildings obviously don't turn, whereas units do most of the time anyway, if they're not the fucking Dragoon in the back of the day. Or like, the science vessel, right, Seraph? So that's like one example. Anyway, most of the stuff turns, and so like graphically, it visually turns. And so when it's in like that situation, then you would be in a spot where you would want to configure it in a certain way. And part of that configuration is pointing it to iscript, which is basically just a scripting language to write the animation code that the game then interprets and says, okay, I need to play this frame at this time, and I need to do this, and I need to do that, spawn this overlay, do missile damage at this time, or whatever. So there's some gameplay and a lot of visual code associated with that. Some sounds as well. That's where you get the sound files played. So the reason why I'm talking about all this is because for a long time we've been gated in terms of how many more units we can add by the limitation to the one monolithic file of iscript. And the idea of splitting it off into one file per entry of image data is the ideal scenario will be that we'll just never be able to hit the limitation, because you'll have an entry per file and you'll be fine. And so conceivably, I don't know all the details. Like, I actually don't know if maybe the limit will still be there and still be hittable, but it'll like double our effective size or something. Doubling our current size would probably be pretty good in the context of we'd be able to finish the existing units that need to be added for the races, then the factions, and then also add a fourth race, and probably even a fifth race at that point if we wanted to, if we had the ability to. And so it would definitely unlock a lot of stuff. The specifics of how much space it would give us and also the changes it would make to our pipeline still need to be vetted and figured out. I do think that if we're not editing a single monolithic file, it's going to be a little bit unfortunate, because the monolithic file part really helps me personally as a developer, because it's easy for me to just be like, okay, I need to compare notes. What did I do with the burrow animation of this unit? And let me just quickly navigate to that and then copy paste it into the other unit and the other view of Notepad++, and then I can quickly navigate between that, right? It's very, very convenient for me. But obviously, if the trade-off is I can't use that current method that we're currently using to even add more content, and we're missing units and stuff, well, I think it's pretty clear what we actually need to do here. So I think it's worth doing no matter what. The question is, can we sort of soften the blow towards productivity, and can we, make sure that it's not that much worse to use from a user, like a developer standpoint, while still giving us all of the benefits that we need it for. And so, yeah, X405 coming back in he made contact again kind of recently in the last couple of days, and he was able to get us a little bit of info on what would need to be done for the iscript extender to be completed in a context of like what we would want for the size increase. So we'll have to see. We'll have to see what ends up happening. The hope is that we can do this relatively easily, especially compared to the previous method that we were trying to do. And so, yeah, we'll just keep you guys posted on that, but there has been movement on it, and it does look pretty promising. We will see how much work still needs to be done. Probably, I don't know when I'll have another update on it. I would say maybe the next time you're listening to me talk about Prototype, I'm talking about that, at least in the context of, hey, there's been this movement and this update, but there you go. There's a little bit of info. So I do want to talk a little bit about the Askosi. This is the 4th race for Cosmonarchy. I wanted to talk a little bit more about their cornerstones in detail, and that's what this section is going to be about. The main thing is that some people have noticed that they don't really have a corpse mechanic that much. Instead, they do technically have it with Destination Scrap World, which is their cornerstone, where specialists can recycle Fallen to restore life. And that's not their only way of healing. The Cardinal is a unit that you can make out of the Radix, which is the basic infantry production for the Askosi. And it has a passive called Sustaining Sermon, where every second strike, it releases a restorative pulse, and all allies within 3 range heal with the equal to damage dealt. Now, their attack is 2x8, so it deals 16 damage in total. So it will proc every attack, and it has 2 armor pen. And these are all current stats. Obviously, that could change. But you can imagine this frontline melee unit healing itself and other allies within the area for 8 damage, or less if it was, attacking a target with 3 or more armor. You can imagine that being pretty effective. Now, it has an attack rate of 1 per second, so it does take a little bit for it to stack up, and you will be able to out DPS it, in theory. Also, this unit does cost a bit of gas as well, so there is that. It's not something that you can necessarily spam out in the early stages of the game. But also another thing that you have to imagine is that if you have a fast-moving melee unit, as this is likely to be, then you can use the Proselyte, the other infantry unit that we have a concept for. It has Rapid Rendezvous, and this allows you to leap to a target ground ally within 5 range. And now all of a sudden you can use this to basically, like, if the Cardinals forced enemies to kite backwards, when they kite back, the ranged infantry can jump to the melee, and the melee can keep on going. And so that's like one example of, oh yeah, we get to give the Askosi this ability to give chase constantly. And also, if the Cardinal outmaneuvers and has the outpace, like a more movement speed relative to the Proselyte, you can use the Proselyte's ability to retreat with the Cardinal leading the way, and then you jump. So you can imagine this gives you a lot of like really cool micro precision potential. I think it'll be really neat to see how we make that happen. Of course, it's still, for now, a little bit of curious as to how we're going to do the jump in the first place. Hopefully it's, simple enough to make something like that happen, where they lose collision, and then they simply travel. It's sort of like the teleport, but we need to interpolate from one part to the other to change it. And obviously we also need to figure out where its destination is actually going to be relative to where the unit is. And hopefully we can like error out elegantly if there is no destination, we just don't do the jump at all. And we don't spend the energy either. We throw an error message on the screen. That should all be possible, but it is going to require some work. But that's like one example, right, of some cool interactions that you can have from a design standpoint, just like the Cardinal healing means that the Proselytes can jump into the Cardinal as they're attacking to get some heals if they've already been targeted by other things. The Proselytes can also jump to retreat if the Cardinal is retreating, or they can jump to chase if the Cardinal's giving chase from enemies that are kiting or retreating themselves. And there's like all these different things where those can be pretty big helps. Since the Proselyte has more range than 3, it's not necessarily going to be within the Cardinal's healing range, right? As an example of what we're talking about anyway. So, with all that said, I do think that there's a lot of value to being had for the context of the Askosi, with the idea of their interlocking mechanisms. Askosi forces are stronger together, able to collaborate on tasks. That's obviously the team building thing. But the other one is the cybernetic supremacy cornerstone, which is the idea that they have these powerful abilities for relocation, disruption, sustain. This gives them the ability to switch places, navigate, etc. So changing up the battlefield, but they can also they benefit from being together. So both of those cornerstones kind of merging together in one blob, if you will, from a conceptual standpoint, gives you this idea that, oh, okay, the Askosi work together well. They have this sort of like idea where their synergies are more micro intensive than other synergies because they're more positional. And maybe there's like unique movement abilities that you'll get. hopefully we don't go too far down a rat hole with this, where the idea of like, oh, we're not going to have every unit have an ability, for example. We are going to have a number of units that have that rapid rendezvous ability, but the context for it will be a little bit different. There's definitely going to be some that are like, okay, well, I'm using this on a ranged unit initially with a ranged infantry, and then maybe I use it on like a higher tier infantry unit that's melee that deals crowd control. And it's like, oh, I just need a delivery vector for this, low movement unit. And you can imagine that low movement unit being able to relocate conditional on allied positioning suddenly makes a huge difference for like what you can do with it, right? And so, yeah, I think stuff like that could be really cool if you paired these fast moving healing melee units, the Cardinal, with some sort of like slow moving infantry unit that really benefits from being on the front line, but can't always get there on its own. You can imagine that being really legit. So these are different ideas for the Askosi's design. You can imagine some additional units and additional behaviors and stuff that could come out of that kind of design, fall out of that design organically. There is still the frontline reassembly that I'm very excited about, which is the cornerstone where they basically have a forced deployment when they drop below a certain amount of HP, and it's only going to apply to certain units that are on the heavier side. This could be, walkers from the biotics, or this could be tanks from the mechanized branch. So these are those two branches there. There is the Skyborn branch, which is for air, but I was talking with Vik recently about how maybe it would be better to have that not be an air-only branch, because I kind of like the way that Zerg worked out, where they have their air scattered throughout a bunch of branches. And yes, technically, like, the Talos exists in the infrastructure branch for Terran, and the Vassal and Barghest exist in the robotic and disciple branches for Protoss. So sure, you can make the argument that there's like air units. Oh, the Empress is also robotic. Clarion is robotic. So like, yeah, sure. There's air units in other contexts for the other races too, but it's much more uniformly indispersed for Zerg. I think it would be healthy if we had a couple of air units scattered around for in the other contexts as well. Terran is the only one that really doesn't have any military air unit that's present in Raider or Armor for their branches, in the context of like, yeah, they have nothing that can fight. I mean, the Talos technically can fight, but you wouldn't recommend it. And then for a while, there was the Pythian that was in infrastructure, but that got moved to orbital a while back. So just to give you some ideas. And Protoss is a little bit more indispersed. Could probably have a couple more like utility units or whatever mixed in here and there. Definitely something that could happen. So I think we'll probably adopt a Protoss-esque theme for the Askosi's Air, where there will be like a branch that has more of them than the other branches, but there will also be a branch that like a couple of features of the biotic and mechanized branches that have that. Maybe there's going to be like a jump pack infantry unit or something that has the ability to transform from temporarily in the context of an air unit, so that they can use their energy for that sort of thing. Obviously, you'd have to ask about what happens if they run out of energy over unpathable terrain. I don't know is the answer. Who knows what happens? Maybe they move slower. But technically are continuous. Maybe that's just always what happens, though. Like maybe the idea is that their movement speed gets slowed, but they remain an air unit when they're out of energy, so that you can always do that. But it's like obviously at some point you want to land so you can move faster, right? If it's like a harassment unit, it becomes a lot more vulnerable. Perhaps maybe their weapon is deactivated while in the air, and it's just there for repositioning. You can imagine elegant solutions to that kind of design problem. And so that's like another example, right? Where it's like, it's technically a ground unit, but you can conditionally turn it into an air unit. I think stuff like that being kind of maybe not a cornerstone, but like interspersed for a couple of different units for the biotic branch would be really cool. And then I'm not really sure about the mechanized one, but their idea of like really powerful relocation abilities mean that there's probably going to be a Skyborn unit that is a utility unit that basically like airlifts units on a conditional basis. So it's like, instead of transporting conventionally, and they'll have conventional transports, you can imagine a situation where this Skyborn unit can grab like hold of a mech unit or a biotic unit or any ground unit basically, and it can relocate them very swiftly to another location within vision range or something, right? So that could be like one example where they can go across the map fairly quickly. Yeah, travel time would be consistent. So if you have if you're going halfway across the map, then that will be longer endeavor than going just from my main to my natural. But that's an example of something that you might see as well, just to give you some ideas of what we're thinking about. So yeah, a lot of thoughts have been going through my head about the Askosi as we inevitably get closer and closer to being able to actually implement them and work on them thanks to the iscript extender. And I feel like those 2 points, the Askosi discussion and the iscript extender, they kind of go hand in hand in glove perhaps. So it makes sense to talk about them here. But that's not the only thing that I think we can talk about. there's a legitimate question, and this might be a little bit clickbaity because the section won't be very long, but there's a legitimate question as to whether or not there could be a fifth race for Cosmonarchy. And I don't want to get into scope creep, feature creep, etc. I think we have learned a lot from Cosmonarchy, and it's been very exciting to build out all of the content and to make the tutorials and make the tournaments and host those and run all of this stuff. And it's great. It's been great. And we obviously, I think the Askosi are going to be a really cool race to play. I think the recent changes to the game, as far as like the balancing and the economy and stuff, have been really positive for the game overall. It's great to see that we've managed to do that. And yeah, there's a lot of things. There's a lot of things that have worked out lately, but there's also a lot of things that I think it would be healthy to explore in a way where you can't really do that within Cosmonarchy, because you're going to be taking what, like a game that's already like complete in a sense, or it's like the core systems are complete, and you're going to be changing those core systems after they've already been completed and kind of agreed upon. And so we're not really going to be making big sweeping changes. Like, we're not going to experiment with not having armor and armor penetration, or maybe just not having armor penetration but keeping armor. We're not going to experiment with stuff like that, because that would be very sweeping, a very large mechanistic change that would touch every single interaction in the game just about. So you can imagine that would be really, really out of scope. So as a result, that means that at some point, if we want to experiment with abilities like that, if we want to experiment with things like smart casting, or we want to experiment with things like, maybe just smart casting, or I guess you could call it single casting as opposed to group casting, but only for buildings, only for that sort of thing. Well, that's a technically difficult thing to implement in Cosmonarchy, and maybe we shouldn't do it anyway, because again, it would be a sweeping mechanistic change. So let's make it our own game for that, right? That's the obvious corollary. This is all about prototyping out a game. So, or the concept for a game that we can release a game in the future that doesn't have any of the caveats of being tied to an existing IP, and also not really us having any source access and all this other shit that makes it really hard to debug and arduous to do all this stuff in. And we'll have our own editor instead of relying on some dead editor, or maybe somebody else to come out with a new editor in the future, which may happen, but is taking its sweet fucking time. So, and that's fine, like that, we can't control that. So that's great. But yeah, let's go back to this idea. Could there be a fifth race? Well, I don't know that there could be, but if I had to make a fifth race, I would be tapping Onatar's Blood Summon for that. So for people who don't know, the Askosi are actually a race within Xibalba, my original setting for the RTS, or for it's original sci-fi setting, and we were going to make it, we're going to use it for an RTS, we're going to use it for other games as well. Actually, it's funnily enough, because Helldivers 2 came out somewhat recently. People have been playing that. And the first thing I thought of when I booted it up was like, oh, a game like this could work really well with Xibalba, because you'd have like 20 different alien species and stuff, and you could slowly add them, as I guess the developers of Helldivers are planning, is adding more and more, alien species to interact with. So who knows what's going to happen with that? That's hopefully cool. I'm not really a fan of their grind-based, progression system, but just speaking from a visceral sense, yeah, it would be great to have a game like that in Xibalba. So that's like one example. Like maybe we would do something like that down the line. And yeah, it's really cool to imagine, let's tap some of the other games that I've conceived of, like Onatar and Pangea. Let's grab some of those other IPs, those games, those if you want to call them IPs. I mean, they're not technically registered or whatever. But if you want to grab those settings and say like, okay, is there an RTS race that I could make that would fit in Cosmonarchy? Blood Summon would be it. They would be the most, the one that would be the most standout compared to the other races that are already in Cosmonarchy or plan to be with the Askosi. So if we were going to do a fifth race, it would be that. And, it's not exactly outside the realm of possibility. It's just not looking very likely right now, because we do eventually want to make our own games, obviously. So that's something that we'll be doing next year, with this being the last predominant year that we focus really heavily on Cosmonarchy development. So, I'll still be probably making campaigns and stuff and hosting occasional tournaments maybe while we work on our next match, our next game. But I am not 100% sure that I'll have the ability to just build a fifth race out of nowhere. So, maybe that's something that gets added in by some fan down the line. Who knows? But I don't know that there will be a fifth race. But hey, I felt like it was worth pointing out my thoughts on it. The fact that it would be technically conceivable is an interesting sort of turn of events there. So there you have it. Some nice little clickbaity thing that gets thrown into the YouTube description, and people see that in the timestamps and like, what the fuck? And then they click it, and then they maybe are disappointed. But there you go. There's some musings on that. And yeah, I think because there's so many more epic things that we will do in the future, as cool and as epic as it would be to say that we made a game that had, 4, 5, 6 races or whatever, like, yeah, sure, we did that with Cosmonarchy, but let's do it with like our own game too. You know what I mean? So let's talk a little bit more about the coffee questions. Oh, wait, no, there's one last subject that we can talk about here. So let's talk about the Gauntlet. Gauntlet A, there's two different gauntlets to this Acropolis. And Acropolis, if people who are not aware, weren't around for Ascension, Acropolis is the new Ascension. Acropolis is our premier 1v1 tournament. The way that it works is that we have Gauntlet qualifier stages that feed into a battlement stage, which is group style, where you have the King of the Hill style, where winner stays on. Whoever gets to 4 wins first wins their group in first place. And then we decide second place after that with any requirements if we still need to play games after that, which we often do. And then the top 2 places in the battlements for each group go into playoffs. And so we have 8 players total because there's 3 players in each group and 2 players qualify to playoffs from each group with first seed or second seed depending. And then we have a playoffs bracket of double elimination, 8 players in there, and we go all the way to the grand final. So they start off in quarterfinals, then we go to a lower bracket as well as an upper bracket, and then we do all that stuff. So that is obviously really exciting and cool. The playoff stage is called the throne room stage now. It's very epic because you are crowning a champion, a new emperor perhaps, unless Nabline ends up running it back. But I don't know. I'm worried about Hamster, and we got some newcomers. Maybe Urbmon will participate as well. I know Art of Turtle is looking good to qualify as we currently stand. But yeah, the Gauntlet stage has been going pretty well. We've been making the games fairly, playing them out pretty well. Later today, we'll have the first qualifying set between Newt and 3Crow, as well as this coming Friday, we'll have Jack versus Art of Turtle, Jack Elinsky versus Art of Turtle. So that's ZVZ, T versus P for Newt versus 3Crow, and ZVZ for Jack and Art. So that's really cool. And then we still have the lower bracket. We got a couple of games to be played there. However, I am pretty sure that we'll get those done in short order. After the next 3 games of the lower bracket, we will know the matchups for the lower qualification. And there are going to be 3 spots on offer just 4 spots on offer in this tournament and 2 spots on offer in the second Gauntlet as well. So the second Gauntlet will be a little bit more cutthroat. We'll see how many people want to sign up for it. I'll be seeing if I can petition Urbmon too. We'll see what he wants to do for that. But I imagine we'll get some more people in. Maybe Benno will want to do it. Maybe the Beaver will want to do it. Maybe, I say maybe Benno. Benno could still qualify in this tournament. He's not actually out yet. So we'll have to wait and see. But because the field will be a bit more thinned out with the top heavy players already graduating over, then even though there's still only 2 slots on offer instead of 4, it's still like, oh, okay, this is pretty cool. So let's fingers crossed there. Technically, we could do a different system where we do 3 slots from this and 3 slots from the next. But I think since I already advertised this tournament, this Gauntlet A, as having 4 slots, I think we'll probably just do 4 slots here, 2 slots to the next one. And then I'll make that alteration in the future. Because we weren't really sure how many slots were going to be on offer, since we had some people not confirm that they wanted to accept their invite to the battlements until later on, like way later. So anyway, all that said, pretty cool stuff. And I did want to also mention that we'll have another invitational in the month of April coming up. That's because we are going to try to bridge the communities between CPL and Cosmonarchy, but we're also going to, that's Coach People League for people who don't know, it's a Brood War initiative. We're also going to be looking to piggyback off of BSL at some point. BSL is sort of like the foreign version of ASL in some ways. There's like I think it's Bombastic Star League is the name. But BSL is basically like, hey, let's do, a bunch of foreign only players, right? You don't have, I don't think you have any Koreans. There's Korean nationals and people who have moved to America and stuff, but they get all their foreign practice and whatnot. Anyway, it's cool. It's definitely a cool initiative. I like it. And we've got a number of people who I've been talking with who said that after BSL is over in about 2 weeks, they would be interested in doing an invitational. So we'll see if we can confirm and get them in and get them practiced and stuff. I'd love to see some games from like I forget how to pronounce this guy's name because he's Polish, but it's like Mistrz or Mistrz. I don't know how to pronounce Polish names, dude. But it looks like Mistrz, which I always thought was Mr. Z, but obviously that's just because I'm an American. And I think it translates to some Polish word. I'm sure somebody will be able to tell me. But he's a Brood War guy. He plays Protoss. It'd be great to get another Protoss player in, see if he wants to play. Obviously, we still have Urbmon lying around. I'm sure he'd be down to do it. Maybe what we'll say is that the top 6 for this tournament will get invited to that, and then we'll still have, depending on how many other people there, I'll reserve right to invite people like the top streamers like Terror and DeWalt and stuff like that from Brood War and see what they want to do. So yeah, I don't know. I've been courting DeWalt and Terror for a long time. but schedules have not worked out. However, after BSL is over, there won't be any concerns like that, and hopefully, with any luck, they'll also be still interested in that's what they told me. I'm going to take them at their word. I feel like they would probably just say, no, I'm not interested if they weren't actually interested. So some takeaways there from the competitive stuff. Gauntlet A is going pretty well so far. We did hit a bit of a snag where some of our series can't be played in the middle of the week, but that's to be expected. So this weekend, we'll be finishing up this Gauntlet and also opening up Gauntlet B for signups. So stay tuned for that. And again, the 13th of April, that's when we're going to be doing our Acropolis #1, the battlement stage. This is kind of where the real tournament starts in my mind. But the qualifier is obviously pretty cutthroat. So, double elimination, but still, there's some nasty plays out there. I still have to I tip my hat to Beaver, who almost took out Benno in a series. Very close, 2-1. The game that Beaver won was fast, and the games that Benno won were 45 minutes apiece. So that shows you it was a grueling series, and Benno immediately had to go to bed. So pretty good shit. All right. I think we know what time it is. It's time to answer coffee questions. If you are interested in Cosmonarchy, if you appreciate it, if you think it's brought value into your life, and you happen to have some spare cash to splash, you can go to our coffee link in the description. And now I will even enable it on the stream overlay or the OBS output here so you can see it in the bottom left. Yes, that is the link. You go there, you send us some money, and as a token of our thanks, you can ask questions in the Discord channel that is exclusive to coffee supporters. Now, the most surefire way to get guaranteed in here is to link your Discord account to coffee, but you can also just tell me that you donated. I obviously get receipts for that sort of thing, and I'll confirm that it's you actually, and then we'll get you added in there. So there you have it. Up first, we have a question from Myrian, who asks about my opinions on virtual reality. He says, how do you regard virtual reality, and do you think that such a platform or system could be utilized for a decent RTS? And it's funny because this question was posed like a week ago, but since then, a video has come out by Mental Outlaw talking about the Neuralink from Elon Musk's company has actually been tested in humans, and it does work. So as dystopian as that potentially is, it's still pretty cool. You can't deny the idea that being able to not have to use your mouse and keyboard to play an RTS game would be really legit. And that's kind of related to virtual reality. I mean, you still have peripherals and stuff, but you can see more details, and maybe you can have a more immersed view in the experience. You can actually see okay, my troops are taking these engagements and doing this stuff. I think, oh man, I'm forgetting I think it's Tom Clancy's End War. It wasn't virtual reality exactly, but it had some interesting details there. I think you could give voice commands and stuff. RTS has courted these kinds of ideas in the past. They've always ended up being a bit more cinematic than actually useful or interesting, which is unfortunate. They've always been at best proofs of concept and not really necessarily good games by themselves. Tech demos maybe would be another way to put it, kind of like what I view Half-Life as. So it's worth pointing that out because you don't really know if it would be that useful. I think it could be used for RTS. I've never really played virtual reality stuff. My brother was pretty hooked on it for a very brief period of time, and then since then he's not used it at all. So that kind of gives you an indication of maybe it is a little bit more of a flash in the pan type thing. It seemed like an interesting novelty. I have not ever put a VR headset on, so I don't even know what it looks like. But it seems like it would be a cool idea. It's just the tech is very primitive right now compared to what it will eventually be. The Neuralink thing kind of represents the end stage, or at least a very significant next evolution of what virtual reality is. I guess the end stage would actually be being downloaded into a simulation and having total enmeshment with the digital stuff. But good luck. Good luck with that. I don't know that you'll still be a human at that point. So yeah, it's an interesting tech. It's interesting as an idea. Could it be used for RTS? Yeah, I think so. For a decent RTS is the specific verbiage of the question. I think so, yeah. It would definitely be a very different game. I guess technically you could do the funny Brood War thing where it's you tell a unit to do something and maybe it goes a very, stupid path unless you dedicate your brain power specifically to piloting that unit. I guess you could do that, but I don't really know how you would do that without it seeming like RNG or whatever. Because it already kind of feels RNG sometimes in Brood War anyway. So I'm not 100% sure about that, but I also don't really know, at that point, does brain power, does it actually mean that the only way that you can lose a game is if there's IMBA or if you just have a worse brain than somebody else? I feel I don't know how that would work in competitive, but I could see its applications for, virtual reality in the context of not Neuralink, but virtual reality itself. I could see that as in the context of single player RTS. I think that could be that would probably be pretty neat. You could probably do some really cool stuff with that actually. So I don't know that it would be very competitive, but most games aren't competitive, even if they are competitive. If you know what I mean. Most games don't even try to be competitive in the single player aspect. So I think you could adopt some pretty sane standards and then happen to be using virtual reality and lean into that in your design. Just try not to make it a gimmick would be my advice. But there you go. My answer to Myrian's question. Our next question comes from the Shambler, who asks yet again about the lore of Cosmonarchy. The custom setting that we've built for it is the Chrysilient Sector, and he asks, considering how it is common for dying civilizations to trundle along long after the issues which have doomed them reach the point of no return, would you say that the Orion Imperium is in a state of decline, stagnancy, or ascendance? Well, that's an interesting question. I'm not sure that they are ascending per se, but they are not. I think it would be unfair to say that they're declining. I guess by definition, that means that it would be stagnancy in the sense that they're not doing anything or not making progress, rather. But I hesitate to even say that. It's because they're being contested. It's like, I don't really think there's a point in human history that you can look at and say, oh, this makes sense as a parallel. Because when there's an empire moving around, has there ever been a situation where another empire was rivaling them, or many other empires were all kind of like not necessarily equal? Maybe one of them was more dominant than the others, but they couldn't move forward and expand their reach, or they couldn't even necessarily focus inward and try to make sure that they build everything up that they need to in order to eventually expand their borders and stuff like that. I'm not sure that there's been a lot of cases of that. I mean, you can point to like things like the Holy Roman Empire and their contemporaries. You can obviously point to things like the failed Mongolian invasion of Japan back in the day as well. There's like a lot of cases where it's like, okay, yeah, in history there have been empires or nations that have fought each other, but I'm struggling to imagine a case that's super comparable to this. I'm sure there probably are a couple in history, but I'm not a huge history buff, so I won't know them off the top of my head. But yeah, I would say the situation for the Orion Imperium is that they're too widespread and grounded in the areas that they are widespread. And there are borders that have flex to them in that, yeah, there's like a war front where they're, being invaded, or they're being the ones who are invading. And in those situations, there's more flex to it. But the actual borders of their control, of their guaranteed control, they haven't really been jeopardized. They haven't really been, there's not like insurrections mounting. There's not, a lot of infiltrations happening that they are aware of anyway. There's not really anything where you can point to like an area and say like, yeah, this is about to go kaput. This is about to no longer exist in favor of our homies. So I think the Orion Imperium is probably fine, but they're not necessarily able to consistently move out. They are locked in, not necessarily a perpetual war, because who knows how long it'll be, but they are locked in a very heated conflict that is not liable to move in. And in some cases, on some fronts, they are winning. Like they're driving back certain other Terran factions here and there. But they're not necessarily winning versus the Divine Primacy, nor are they necessarily winning versus the Zerg. Yet they're also not necessarily losing either. There's some give and take. Some years go by with the Zerg, getting decided advantages, and some years go by with the Orion Imperium getting those advantages in the same areas. Sometimes there's been a couple of the fronts that have been kind of the same in terms of it's two, or you can't call the battlegrounds for one side or the other for like maybe 5-10 years in some cases to indicate like how long they've been fighting over just individual planets or an individual system or something. And some of them have gone over the course of maybe a century, have rocketed back and forth between Orion control and other control. So that's just one example as a point. But there's definitely like a situation where I think they could be in a state of ascendance if it wasn't for all the people holding them back. I don't think they are responsible for a large number of the issues that currently face the Imperium. It's just like, well, you're dealing with a lot of aliens and a lot of rival Terran nations as well. So you're naturally going to be fighting. In universe, in the imaginary world where we don't have to worry about the iscript extender, the Askosi have also started to contest them pretty recently. They're a more recent arrival though, so they don't have as much history within the setting, which is kind of fitting considering they're going to be a very recent arrival to the game itself, just to give you an idea of what's going on. So there you go, Shambler. I don't know if that actually answers your question, but hopefully it did. Jesse actually pops in, not to say anything about a question or anything. He says, no question this time around. We'll have something for next week. Thanks anyway, and looking forward to the podcast. Well, I hope it answered some interesting questions or posed some interesting questions. And definitely, I know that you're hungry for that Protoss tutorials. Again, sorry to Jesse, I couldn't get it out in time, but thanks for all your support, man. And thanks for working with us to build some improvements to the multiplayer setup as well for Cosmonarchy. That's going to be really, really cool when it comes out. So big shout out to him. Everybody say thanks, Jesse. Thanks, Jesse. All right, let's move on. We've got another question here from 3Crow. He asks about Calldown features. If you were going to implement nukes or other Calldown type features for the Askosi, Protoss, and Zerg, how would you go about it? That's an interesting question. If I was going to implement nukes, I'm not sure I would do nukes because those definitely feel like a Terran-oriented thing. One thing I was actually thinking about is like, based on this question, is could we do something where one of the like the one of the races can call down reinforcements or something, right? And I guess like there could be an interesting thing if the Zerg could call down like Vilgaleths or call down a Larvosk or something like that, or whatever. Maybe just a Kagran, right? That could be kind of interesting as from that concept. I don't know if it's like the idea of like being able to just drop in an actual unit that you could use. What would that feel like? Would that feel too easy? Would that feel like, how would the execution be like? But I'm not sure. I think it could be really cool to, I don't know if I would do it as a call down for Zerg, but to have something that could gestate into a forward post or whatever, like a unit, like maybe you could take a unit and turn it into a Kagran or something. I don't know. Maybe like a hive beacon that would like summon that from orbit. But I'm not sure if that feels too good. You know what I mean? Like there's, I don't know if that particular thing would feel too good because again, you don't really want to just be like getting territory for free or whatever. So I have to think about that. I think the idea of calling down Vilgaleths or something like that could be kind of neat. Maybe calling down a some sort of temporary, like a spore that would just create like a slow field in the ground or something. Even like I don't think it would be anything remotely comparable to the nuke in the context of it's doing like a wide area of damage and irradiating a whole location for a long period of time. It wouldn't do that. It wouldn't be so widespread. If there was going to be a Zerg one and it wasn't calling down reinforcements or Kagrans or something, maybe it would call down like, you know, an aura effect, and it would specifically be localized to a small area, and you would have to do it a lot. That would probably be what it would be. And so it wouldn't be something that you build elsewhere, like the Anvil builds the Morning Star, assembles it, arms the missile, and then you can launch it from a specialist. It would be like, well, you'd probably still launch the call down for the Zerg from a specialist, but it wouldn't be something you have to build. So I'm not really sure how that's different than the Matroleth spawning the Vilgaleth. So I just don't know if it fits the Zerg, but that's probably what I would think about doing is like, let's do a call down without having to prep it per se. On the Protoss side, it could be kind of neat to like load the you know, maybe a bunch of units that you make into some sort of gate that then can be used to warp them into a location. Sort of like the Didact recall creates this like link between two areas that's channeled by energy. You could imagine like, okay, I'm gonna warp my units in, but I have to already have made them first. And that could be kind of interesting if you like load them up into this warp gate type structure and they await deployment remotely or something, right? I think that could be kind of neat. You could probably do that for Terrans as well. I imagine like a drop pod type situation. But I guess it makes more sense for the Protoss because they don't need to call it down from orbit. They warp it using their warp matrix network. So that's a little bit more like in line with their technology and their lore, so to speak. And for the Askosi, would I do call downs? I'm not 100% sure about the Askosi. I think maybe they could call down like certain banners or whatever that they could use as like neutral things to jump to or whatever. But again, that, you know, would you prepare those somehow? Like, I'm not sure. The thing about a call down, like defining what a call down is, so it's not just a top bar ability or something like that, and it's also not just an active ability like the Vilgaleth cast from the Matroleth, is I guess a call down is like you build something, you prepare it, and then you deploy it on the map somewhere with some other method, using a unit to deploy it. And so that's why I guess like the Zerg thing didn't really make sense. You would have to like, maybe what you could do for Zerg, to revisit that real quickly, is maybe like the Cathrostalor or some other like unit could like fire up the like specific, or there could be like a structure that does this where you load units into the structure, or you gestate like a structure that you can put, using the structure you gestate another structure, and it launches it into the orbit and can then be used to, like, you can use some other units to like coordinate the deployment from orbit. And so you could have like an orbital strike that you prepare by launching into the sky, and then you can drop like a Hatcherosk or a Kagrant or maybe a group of units or something that you fired off into there. You can deploy that on the field, right? That could be something that you could do. That would be more like an actual call down, because the idea is that you've already spent money on the thing and now you're calling it down to be deployed, right? And so that would probably be something that I would look into thinking about it. And then, would there be multiple types of that? Like ideally there would be. I mean, I've always wanted to have like different kinds of missiles as well that you can deploy. But the way to do that is not obvious for a UX standpoint. Like, would only certain specialists be able to fire certain missiles? If any specialist can fire any missile, which is more freeform and definitely more something that I would want, then you have to find some system to like indicate like, okay, what if I have one anvil with one missile type and another anvil with another missile type, and then like what gets fired first? Do I get to like, does the nuke, the launch strike, the paint missile strike button turn into a sub menu that then gives you a choice between them? I guess that's probably fine. So that would be like one thing to think about. What else? I guess there's also the for the Askosi, if you're thinking about a deployment that you spend money and time on something, so there's an opportunity cost to it, and then you throw it up into the sky or find some other way to like call it down elsewhere. And that's what like the Protoss and Zerg ideas were, and that's obviously what the missile storage is for Terran. What would the Askosi be? I mean, it could be kind of interesting if maybe one of their advanced engineer types, or like advanced workers, could specifically like, maybe they could disassemble a structure, and then, because they have like the whole team building thing, they could also choose to reassemble it somewhere. But I'm not really sure how that would work in with the orbital stuff. Like, yeah, I'm not 100% sure about that. I don't know that I would do a call down for the Askosi, I guess. I can't think of anything off the top of my head. It's probably something that I would have to actually see them be played first and then think about like, okay, what would complement that? So yeah, but anyway, there's some interesting design questions in there, and I think there's some cool thoughts mixed in there. So I'll leave it at that. But if I have some ideas for the Askosi or something, maybe I'll talk about it later. But the call down stuff is cool. I think it could be cool anyway. A lot of the times it might feel like feast or famine because it's like the nuke stuff, but I think it could be a little bit more interesting in the mid game or late game or something, if you can do it differently. All right, let's talk about the final question of the day. We've got Chumbeque's question, who asks about micromanagement as a vector for skill expression. Hoo boy, this is a big topic. So he says, something I just remembered from my modding days at a big Age of Empires project. My take towards heavy micromanagement is that, although we should reduce it in a broad sense, I didn't mind if specific factions were very micro-intensive. However, most of the rest of the people on the team were of the idea that there was never a circumstance where you should have micro-intensive units, or you should have micro-intensive units, regardless of whether it was a mechanic for the entire game or a single faction. What is your take on the subject? Well, I think maybe some of my discussions about the Askosi about 30 minutes into this show kind of indicated that I'm definitely the type of guy who thinks that you can do like really micro-intensive things and get a lot of value out of them. I've also designed other behaviors that are definitely very micro-intensive, but if you can do them, give you a lot of yield. Thinking about like the simulacra. For example, actually the cast that goes live on the same day as this show goes live has Hapsea using the simulacrum, and it's passive where if you can micromanage it enough to only take enough damage to be used, is like, yeah, okay, I can do I can get a lot of value out of that if I spend a lot of my APM on it. And if you're good enough to do that and also macro and also expand and also build, melee units or whatever, like you can do all that stuff. And then, okay, yeah, you're good enough to do that. You can exploit that. So it's like, it is a vector for skill expression. That was also part of the question I sort of skimmed over, is Chumbeque didn't mind if the factions had micro intensive stuff because it's also a kind of skill expression. And I agree. Should it be the only thing that the race can do? Probably not. Not just because you want players who are lower APM to be able to find success with good strategy or whatever, as long as the overall skill is good, but also because you actually want there to be different sort of playstyles being possible to explore within the same race. So if one race was the micro race, then, I mean, setting aside potential balance concerns where maybe at a high level that's the only viable race, which could conceivably happen, right? Like that's definitely something that could be the case. You wouldn't want that to be the only thing that they're known for, right? Like, I think the mech and the support units for the Askosi, even if they benefit a lot from micro, will also benefit a lot from positioning. And even some of the biotic units, the infantry units that they have, will benefit a lot from positioning. That's like cardinal. And the micro part comes from like specific units that they have being really, really, they benefit a lot from not just positioning, but also micro. And so I think that's important to think about, because if you're just microing, then that's great. But you also want to, like, the fundamental aspect of RTS is always macro. However, part of the other part of the fundamental part of the RTS is having to focus on so many things where you can, there's not really a wrong choice per se. Like, I can focus more on my army production, my expansions, my economy, my tech, or I can focus more on the micro. And like, one of those is maybe more correct in a specific situation, but you can offset that with good enough micro, just like you can offset bad micro or just inattentive army management with having more army because you macroed better. So there's many things that you can choose to focus in on, and players are going to focus in on different things based on their playstyles. So definitely having vectors for that for all of the races. Like, bio is more micro intensive than mech for Terrans, right? Like, you got some pretty good micro stuff that you can do with vultures and such, and Cyclops, good targeting selection and all this other stuff. But generally speaking, it moves slower. You know, vultures move faster, but everything else moves slower. You're going to have more value out of positioning, cliff advantage, that sort of thing. Bio requires you to put the frontliners on the front line and stim your Mavericks at the right time, and then move your units ahead and figure out ways to focus fire and like what to do and when to retreat. Like, there's more decision making about the army positioning. And I think that's great as a general duality of like, and you know, there can be like interspersed like, oh, if I add in Anseals, then that changes the game because maybe then I really have to micro the Anseals. So that's going to be good for mech. But if I do it with the bio and I'm good enough with my micro, then my bio becomes even better. You know, there's like things like that, right? And so there's all other details as well. Like, bio has more tempo than mech, not just because it's more mobile on average, but also because it comes online faster. It's less resources. You can build your economy up faster with it. So there's all sorts of different details that like make it really good and rich, in my opinion. But I think having, you know, a branch that generally means an opener, a set of openers that is like, this one's more micro and this one's less micro in terms of requirements to be good, but also you get more value out of the micro intensive one if you can do it. Like, that's cool. So I think that's something that you would want to keep in mind with designing a faction that is micro intensive in air quotes. You wouldn't want that to be the only thing that they're known for, but I absolutely think it's a viable thing for general design. So there's my answer to Chumbeque's question, and hopefully it was on topic enough that he was able to get something at least interesting about it out of that answer. And that brings us to the show outro. That's it for this episode of Cosmonarchy, the big number 50. This episode of Cosmonarchy, this episode of Prototype, the big number 50. I am very pleased with the latest progress of Cosmonarchy. We are continuing to look into fixing things like the desyncs and improving things like the iscript extender so that we can fix things like the tech trees not being finished and all that stuff. Obviously, we're also going to be looking to patch up some more issues, improve the melee maps, improve the content, like finish these tutorials. And we'll keep you guys posted on all of those and more in the next episode. I'm also looking forward to collating some stuff for the community roundup. So stay tuned for that. And why don't you make sure to bump up the community roundup, make it big, make it like one of the biggest subjects in the whole show, because there's just so much to talk about. Do your part, you know, spread the word, play some games, stream some content, do some formidable things that make me think, oh shit, I really have to cast that game. That was really funny or whatever. And I'll see you guys later. Peace.